Pep Talk.
Hello and welcome to Pep Talk, the podcast where science meets wellness. I'm Felipe Chaluppe, founder of PeptPure, and it's a great pleasure to launch this project with you. Here we'll explore the world of bioactive peptides, supplementation, longevity, beauty, and health, always based on science and in conversation with leading experts. And to start off, our first episode brings a topic that's currently trending: bioactive peptides and hydrolyzed collagen. More than just an aesthetic supplement, this product has been showing surprising effects in areas like body tissue regeneration, immunity, and healthy aging. Especially today, I have the pleasure of introducing our first guest, Professor Dr. Rodolfo de Paula Vieira, one of the leading names in science applied to nutrition and health in Brazil. He holds a PhD in immunopathology from the University of São Paulo. He works as a full professor at Evangelica, where he leads innovative research in immunology, biotechnology, and more recently, collagen and its systemic action in the body. Throughout his scientific journey, Professor Rodolfo has published over 200 scientific articles in international journals and is ranked in the top 3 on Google Scholar. More specifically, Professor Rodolfo is responsible for defining the study protocols on the effects of PeptPure, highlighting the discovery of the positive impact on immunological markers like TGF-beta and the Klotho protein, a discovery directly linked to healthy aging. Professor, welcome to Pep Talk. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the channel and talk about this very relevant topic that has raised many questions among the general population.
That's great, Professor. Thank you. To begin, could you tell us a little about your scientific journey and how your interest in the interface between immunology, bioactives, and healthy aging came about?
Well, it's quite interesting because ever since my undergraduate studies, I started doing scientific initiation in my second year. I joke that since that period in my second year of undergrad, the research virus got into me and just proliferated. So since that time, I started spending all my time in the lab. That was my second, third, and fourth year of college. After finishing university, I went straight into my master's degree, another 2 years in the master's program in the field of physiology, pharmacology, working with liver pathology at the time. And then I went on to do my doctorate at the University of São Paulo Faculty of Medicine in the pathology department, and my work was with immunopathology, dietary supplements, and physical exercise as well. And then I delved deeper. I did my first postdoctorate at the University of São Paulo Faculty of Medicine. And then I left for Germany to do a second postdoctorate, initially for 1 year, and that 1 year turned into 3 years in Germany, where I actually ended up doing 2 postdoctorates, and in the last 6 months I was there, even serving as an assistant professor in the epidemiology department. And in the second to last year, actually, as a visiting researcher and scientist in the epidemiology department at the University of Freiburg in Germany. So the academic trajectory was more or less along those lines. And I returned to Brazil in 2012. It's been 13 years since I returned to Brazil. And since I came back, I think about a year after I returned, I managed to get a very large research project funded by FASPESP, which is the São Paulo Research Foundation, a project of almost 3 million reais. It was the largest young researcher project in FASPESP's history, which gave me the conditions to set up a laboratory, which was my dream, to have a state-of-the-art lab where I could develop and conduct studies from cell cultures with experimental animals to clinical studies with volunteers, with athletes, and with patients as well. So I had this great opportunity. I'm very, very grateful to FASPESP for giving me this support, which allowed me to set up this laboratory where I work with everything from cell culture, with cells, with animals, and also clinical studies with human beings.
Very good. And this academic journey of yours, how many years has it been?
It was 4 years of undergraduate studies, 2 years for the master's, 3 years for the doctorate, and another 3.5 years practically of postdoctorate in terms of academic training. So it was a very good period. I really made the most of that entire training period. And we joke that in research, you're always in training, because if you look at the speed at which science evolves today, if you go into the main scientific database in the world, which is PubMed, and type in the word cancer, today it yields more than 500 new study findings on cancer per day. So it's humanly impossible to say, I want to stay updated. So it's a really big challenge because depending on the topic, it's such an absurd growth within the field of immunology, which is where I work most. It's a truly massive volume of information. So that's why I say we're always in training. And in the old days, When I started doing research, still as an undergraduate research student, scientific articles weren't all available in a scientific database where you clicked and 90% of the articles opened automatically. What did we have to do? It was funny because we had to buy a photocopy. So there was Barimi there in Sao Paulo, the virtual health library linked to Unifesp, where we would send a request and pay a symbolic fee, really a very symbolic amount, almost just for them to print the article for you, put it in a Ziploc type bag, seal it, and send it to you via mail. So you'd wait there for a week, sometimes a little more, depending on where the person lived, to get access to an article. And if you wanted it, you had to buy them one by one. So back in 98, 99, it was still like that. So if we compare it with the ease we have today of simply clicking and opening an article in its entirety right there for us in a matter of seconds, that's also one of the reasons why science has been growing so much.
Very good. And your relationship or involvement with the supplement market, how did that come about? Because your biography talks a lot about immunology, supplementation, healthy aging, with all this research related to collagen. How did this relationship and this interest in this specific area arise?
Well, actually, it arose because I've always been involved in sports in some modalities, and there was always the issue of supplementation. I started to get interested actually because of that. And over time, when I started doing undergraduate research, then my master's, doctorate, postdoctorate, I began to explore much more, not just the issue of supplementation of dietary supplements geared towards sports performance, but mainly in relation to health. And then it started to dawn on me because if a well-known supplement, whey protein, for example, increases muscle mass, helps muscle recovery, and increases the athlete's muscle mass, what about for the elderly who lose a lot of muscle mass? What about for cancer patients who lose even more muscle mass and various other diseases that also lead to muscle mass loss? And this started to pique my interest actually right from my undergraduate research days. And I started to think about research projects that could associate supplementation, not only regarding sports performance, but also health, and later also with aesthetics and so on.
Very well. And following your journey, we can see that collagen has become an important focus in your more recent studies. What specifically caught your attention regarding peptides in this relationship with science?
So first, if we look back, it used to be just integral collagen sold as a supplement. And then numerous doubts and questions arose. Does it work? Because it's a protein, if it's intact in its integral form, it will be digested and will release the amino acids it's supposed to release, and that's the end of the story. There's no differentiated action in that sense. And then it started to move towards hydrolyzed collagen until we got to the peptides from hydrolyzed collagen, where you have a molecule with an even smaller molecular weight. And in fact, one of the things that sparked my interest was this. During my doctorate, from 2004 to 2007, there at the University of Sao Paulo Faculty of Medicine, I studied pulmonary remodeling a lot. What is pulmonary remodeling, and what are the characteristics of this remodeling? One of the main characteristics of this remodeling in asthma, COPD, pulmonary emphysema, and idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is precisely the accumulation of collagen fibers. And it wasn't well understood. The only thing known at the time was that to have this accumulation, there had to be an increase in the degradation of pulmonary collagen. The pulmonary collagen started to degrade, and then it triggered a mechanism whose molecular mechanism to this day isn't very well understood. And then with these numerous breaks of the collagen fibers in different regions of the lungs, what did researchers start to notice? That the small molecules derived from collagen breakdown, some very innovative studies emerged showing that they were responsible for stimulating lung fibroblasts to produce more collagen. Look how crazy that is. Collagen breaks down due to an inflammatory process and oxidative stress, and the release of metalloproteinases, which are enzymes specialized in breaking down different types of collagen molecules in our body. So both the oxidative stress molecules, which isn't even the most correct term to use, the most correct is redox imbalance, which is the decrease in antioxidant defense and increase in oxidants. This will break the fibers. And I kept that in my head. I said, so this idea that collagen peptides might have an action to stimulate the production or reproduction of collagen isn't so crazy, because this had already been identified from a pathological point of view in lung diseases. I said, so this might have some basis. And that's when I started to study a bit more about it. First, we went to do an initial study to see if the hydrolyzed collagen peptides really activated any cell in any way, because if a substance, whatever it may be, doesn't activate the cell, It's not bioactive. I joke that it's dead active. It's biodeactive. And that was very interesting because we did the first study with hydrolyzed collagen peptide, and we found that it indeed activated both human skin fibroblasts and human skin keratinocytes. So that already, let's say, gave us the freedom and the knowledge to say these hydrolyzed collagen peptides really are bioactive because they activated cells. And from there, then we began to build a whole body of knowledge through different experiments, different research projects to understand what the relevance is or what the relevance of hydrolyzed collagen peptides might be in different organs and tissues, not just thinking about hair, skin joints, tendons, which is much hyped by the media, the issue of using collagen in general for those contexts, but also for other contexts and applications.
And that study, if I remember correctly, was pioneering. It was really a very innovative study from a scientific point of view because nothing had been published with those characteristics, with that protocol, with that finding, correct?
Exactly, with that finding. So all the studies that existed up to that moment with hydrolyzed collagen or with hydrolyzed collagen peptide, they raised many doubts because this proof didn't exist.
And this is all very recent, 2022 onwards.
This is so interesting, and I will tell you why. This also calls our attention to a caution that I think everyone interested in the field of supplementation, whether a professional or an end consumer, should pay close attention to. As you just highlighted, this really makes total sense because this particular study for PeptPure is the very first confirmation that collagen peptides are truly bioactive. But what about the companies that were doing all the marketing before this? We need to start paying close attention to what is out there, everyone. I'm hearing that this is good for this, it will help me with this, help with that, full of promises, but there are mechanisms today like PubMed, which I mentioned, which is the main global scientific database. It's open, anyone can go in there. The website is https://pubmed.ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. Anyone can access it. You don't need any special license. You don't need to pay anything to access the researches. All you have to do is to type in keywords like hydrolyzed collagen or hydrolyzed collagen skin. It has to be in English. And then anyone can have access to their own investigation. Wow, is what's being claimed in this advertisement real? It's very, very interesting. So the real science of collagen is just beginning. And when we published this article in 2022, there were some well-known magazines in the world, mainly in the aesthetics field, that took advantage of this in a good way, published several articles referencing our paper and stating that, it's finally been proven that it works, that it's bioactive, that it stimulates the fibroblast, which is the cell that produces collagen in our body to produce more collagen, and so on. I even received emails from big players all over the world that work with collagen, asking if I could reproduce the study with their product. It was really a boom since we proved it all with PeptPure in 2022 in the journal Nutrients from Switzerland.
And it was that study that provided the basis and the motivation to continue and evolve to clinical studies with patients with even more breakthrough findings, correct?
Yes. And now we have something very new. We did a large clinical study, a randomized clinical trial with 160 women, 40 in each group. There were 4 groups. The control group with Verisol collagen at 2.5 grams per day, a group with PeptPure collagen also at 2.5 grams, and another group with PeptPure collagen at a dose of 10 grams per day. And what did we observe there? Wow. PeptPure really worked. This study, with the objective in middle-aged women from about 40 to 60 years old, with astounding discoveries. For example, we applied a methodology that I used back in my doctorate to do the micrometric analysis of collagen deposition in the lungs. And I used an image analysis technique with specific image analysis software to perform the micrometric detection of the size of the wrinkles. First, the software counted and measured the wrinkles in the periorbital region, which is the region around the eyes. Just as an example, this technique is so precise that globally used for analysis cell size. So going back our study, we used the same technique to measure in micrometers the number and length of the wrinkles, and the software detected the size of the wrinkles decreased substantially over a period of only 3 months of supplementation with PeptPure. That's worth highlighting. What is surprising, really surprising, is that we were able for the first time to prove a substantial decrease in the wrinkle area, in this case, the length of these wrinkles, with a period of only 3 months of supplementation with PeptPure. What could have been the results in 6 months or 1 year? I don't know. We need to run a longer study to answer this question, but it looks promising. And there was also an improvement in the skin hydration. And why is it interesting? If we stop to think in terms of hydration, what happens? We have a reaction there with the amino acids themselves, with the amino acid chains that are being formed. If I have new collagen molecules being formed, for example, this will, in some ways, attract more water to the skin site. This is an amazing discovery, and this leads me to think mainly about the application of hydrolyzed collagen peptide for skin burn victims. So this is something that, as I said just now, this research, the discovery through the in vitro study, started to raise several hypotheses that motivated me to move on to the clinical study. And from there, I was able to explore new horizons for research with PeptPure bioactive collagen peptides.
I remember very well you telling me once a good study answers the questions that are being proposed, but a great study brings new questions, so the science continues advancing. And apparently, that's exactly what happened, since there was a direct relationship between the genetic biological markers from the in vitro study and the clinical study, in addition to the aesthetic and visual improvements through this applied technique, showing a total correlation between the two studies, which really demonstrated, without biases, the effectiveness of PeptPure bioactive collagen.
For sure. In the in vitro study, we had an increase in growth factors, and these growth factors are the proteins stimulate the fibroblast to produce more collagen. And in the case of the clinical study with the women, what was very interesting is that the level of these growth factors was increased in the blood of these women as well after the 3 months of supplementation. So from the point of view of molecular signaling, the same molecule that was synthesized, produced there by the fibroblast and the keratinocyte in vitro, the exact same thing happened, demonstrating direct correlation from both studies. We call it a translational study. There was a specific translation from in vitro to the clinical study, which strongly reinforces the findings. Because not always what we find in vitro is reproduced in the integrated organism as a whole. But in this case, we observed that, so that's extremely important to mention. So the supplementation, besides having increased the levels of growth factors that stimulate fibroblasts both to proliferate and to produce more collagen fibers, in simple terms, more collagen. There was also a very interesting discovery, which was the Klotho protein. The Klotho protein was described about 23 years ago. This protein was discovered in the kidneys, and it was considered a biomarker for the prognosis of chronic kidney disease. So chronic kidney disease over the years evolves into a process of renal fibrosis, which is irreversible. And what was observed in several studies around the world is that when a person's blood Klotho levels were low, even urinary Klotho, the prognosis was worse. There was more inflammation in the kidneys, more cell death in the kidneys, and there was a fibrosis process that was accelerated there. The Klotho protein has been studied by over 1,000 research articles on PubMed, and it's proved to be the A protein with anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-fibrotic, anti-carcinogenic, and anti-aging properties. So look how interesting it is. We observed that supplementation with PeptPure collagen peptides significantly increased the synthesis and release of Klotho into the circulation of these women. And then you say, Rodolfo, what's the implication of this? As I said, it has 5 key properties. The anti-aging in the context of the clinical study that was conducted regarding wrinkles, expression marks, is perhaps the most important. But as a researcher and doctor, I am in fact very excited because after studying other proteins and amino acids like glutamine, BCAAS, with whey protein, and various others like creatine, what stands out with PeptPure? I have in my hands a supplement that is stimulating the person's body to produce more Klotho, which, by the way, this production is systemic. We measured this in the blood, right? And this blood with more Klotho is passing through the entire body from a physiological point of view. Every minute, all the blood of a person has 4, 5, 6, 7 liters regardless, since this varies according to height, stature, and body mass, and this blood volume travels through the entire body. So every minute, all the blood the person has passed through their entire body. So you imagine like you're passing Klotho there as if it were a wheel. This Klotho, it won't just act on the skin, it will act on the joint, it will act on the tendon, it will act on the kidney, the liver, the neurons, it will act on everything. It's very, very exciting for me as a researcher doctor to study these peptides. In this case, PeptPure specifically, which is what we ended up proving that has indeed many applications. From these findings, I can do a study with an oncology patient, I can do it with an elderly person, I can do it with a diabetic. And you say, Rodolfo, why diabetic? Take a chronic renal patient, for example, because in the diabetic, they have diabetic nephropathy, which in the more severe stages, from a protein point of view, This is the great challenge of applied nutrition, for example, to diabetes and chronic kidney disease or diabetic nephropathy. In this case, the question becomes, I need to increase this patient's protein intake, but how? If I increase protein, I overload the kidney. But now with PeptPure, I'm talking about a protein that is, in quotes, pre-digested, where I have polypeptides, free amino acids, resulting from this amazing product as hydrolyzed collagen peptides. And then I keep wonder if these hydrolyzed collagen peptides will be better tolerated and will avoid protein overload the kidneys of this patient, for example, with chronic kidney disease or diabetic nephropathy, or even COPD patient who also already has normally some renal impairment as well. So, and why am I saying this? Because if I give, in quotes, a mechanism to induce an increase in Klotho, this Klotho will preserve the kidneys. Klotho was discovered in the kidneys. So it opened up a whole new world for us in terms of studying the effects of hydrolyzed collagen peptides on numerous parameters. For example, physical activity. Does physical activity increase Klotho levels? Yes, a lot. We did a study. Our study was the second study in the world, published in the most important journal in the exercise field in the world, which is the British Journal of Sports Medicine, the journal with the highest impact factor in the sports science area, showing that a single session of maximum aerobic exercise on the treadmill in 20 minutes was able to raise 34% with just one session. Before ours, there was a study by an American group that did it with free exercise sessions twice a week with postmenopausal women who classically have increased stiffness of blood vessels. Decreased vascular compliance is the correct term. And then after 6 months, they measured Klotho before and after the 6 months of activity, doing activity twice a week. And at the end of 6 months, they had less vascular stiffness and higher levels of Klotho. And in the statistical correlation test, the increase in Klotho correlated with the decrease in vascular resistance. Now, there are several other studies in the literature with physical activity. So I keep imagining, if I want to stimulate the production of Klotho in the body, imagine then what could happen if I combine physical activity plus supplementation with PeptPure. If both stimulate Klotho production, will we have 2x, 3x? What will this synergistic effect of the exercise be like? So it opened up many fields, understand? Many fields for us to investigate it and continue with all this research.
So this study even helped to elevate this concept of collagen, beauty from the inside out, and took it to health from inside out. It certainly goes far beyond beauty. It's exactly what I talk about regarding the PeptPure's mission. It's not just beauty. We're seeking health, well-being, helping people, patients, and I think this study really proves that it sets a path to investigate even more.
Yes, definitely.
Well, one of the questions that I always receive from friends, family, customers is the difference between whey protein and collagen. Could you talk a little bit about it? Draw a comparison, advantages, disadvantages. What's your understanding when to use one versus the other and why?
So whey, right? As a supplement, whey protein, whether it's concentrate, isolate, or hydrolysate, it has been around longer than hydrolyzed collagen. I can't tell you exactly how much longer off the top of my head now, but it's been around longer. And in this context, what happens? There are many more studies on whey protein. The number of studies is much greater than with collagen as a dietary supplement. While collagen in pathological processes, there are many more studies, but we're talking about collagen as a dietary supplement. So the amount of evidence of both positive and negative effects of whey is much greater than that of collagen. As we mentioned in 2020 until 2022, before the study we conducted, like nobody knew if hydrolyzed collagen was bioactive or not. There were some companies that called it bioactive, but it was based on guesswork. It was based on, well, we don't even need to go into much detail. And then what's interesting about this, if I take whey protein, the amino acid profile is different. The amino acid profile is different from the amino acid profile of collagen. So regarding glutamine, regarding branched chain amino acids, BCAAs, which are valine, leucine, and isoleucine. So, but what happens? One thing, and this, I want to make a point of this now, I remembered something very cool here. When I used to lift weights because I wanted to compete, when I started lifting weights at 15 years old, 30 years ago, I started training because I wanted to compete. And I had good genetic potential. I grew a lot with 1 year of training. I was already big and all, and it went on and on and on. At the time, what was sold, there was no whey protein. There was albumin, powdered egg white, which wasn't just white. It always came with a bunch of yolk. There's no whey. There was no way to separate it. There was protein, calcium caseinate, from milk too, right? Which many people had an absurd intolerance for digesting. It was terrible. You mixed albumin with caseinate, man. It had a bomb effect. But what was sold at the time that was the elixir? It was liquid amino acid. So there was amino liquid 2222 from Optimum Nutrition. There was amino fuel from TwinLab. So then you imagine you looked at the label. What was that made of? It was collagen. Collagen maybe broken down, God knows how at that time, 30 years ago, right? With that, it came in that big bottle with syrup. You had to take so many spoonfuls of it. That's how much protein came in it. So just imagine when we thought about collagen, which wasn't hydrolyzed, God knows, I don't remember. I can't tell you precisely now how liquid amino was made. We only thought about the amount of protein. The bodybuilders or aspiring bodybuilders, I had either albumin or I had the calcium caseinate or I had the liquid amino, and I would play around with that. And then if you stop to think if this collagen, it was partially broken down in some way, you understand? Fine, you would break it down and digest it and release the amino acids. So in terms of amino acid comparison, it would be inferior. But here we are talking about another situation. We are talking about a situation where you already have the hydrolyzed collagen peptides with a protein with a molecular weight like PeptPures of 1,600 Daltons, which is very small. You understand? So you say, but what about whey isolate, super bioactive and bioavailable? The bioavailability then, for example, is much higher than whey's because a good part of it is already absorbed directly in the stomach, 1,600 kilodaltons, versus a much higher molecular weight for whey protein. But it's isolate. Even so, it will go through a digestion process. But there's hydrolyzed whey. Okay, it will cost 500 reals for 1 kilogram, right? So you're going to get a hydrolyzed whey. And here a caveat is warranted. There's hydrolyzed whey that many companies make from the concentrate, and there's hydrolyzed whey from the isolate. So the ones, I joke that real hydrolyzed whey, it has to be made from whey isolate, starting from whey isolate, you understand? And you won't find that at a low price, no way, you understand? And then where am I getting at? Wow, we just discovered 3 years ago biological and immunological effects of the peptides with whey. There are already studies on this. Whey being gastroprotective, both for preventing ulcers, gastritis, and everything else. Could it be that hydrolyzed collagen peptides can also do this? There are no studies yet, but is there some potential for this? There is.
What are you basing this on, Rodolfo?
On the increase in Klotho. That discovery was fundamental. Klotho has an antioxidant effect. It can inhibit cell injury due to an increase in oxidants. The main molecular mechanism of gastritis evolving later into an ulcer and then to the formation of its oxidative imbalance in the gastrointestinal tract, right? So you start to have epithelial cell death, epithelial cell dysfunction, a drop in the antioxidant content of the gastrointestinal tract's epithelial cell, the oxidant, the quantity of oxidants is increasing. It will literally corrode this epithelium because it lost its antioxidant capacity until it forms gastritis, then forming ulcers and so on.
So could it be that hydrolyzed collagen peptide might have this effect?
There hasn't been time to do it yet, but the indicators are positive for this, and we have a cellular and molecular basis today to do other investigations. But then, where am I trying to get? I ask myself, what about muscle mass gain? Can I replace whey with collagen, with hydrolyzed collagen? I don't know. By the middle of next year, I'll answer that question for you with certainty because we are conducting a study with COPD patients, right? Comparing the effect of whey protein with hydrolyzed collagen. And then you say, in terms of digestibility, bioavailability, collagen wins. In terms of the profile of some amino acids, whey protein wins, right? Especially glutamine. Whey protein is much richer in glutamine than hydrolyzed collagen is. Will this make a difference in practice in muscle mass gain? I don't know. We are doing a large clinical study to answer this by the middle of next year. This study does not apply only to the elderly, but especially to the elderly, because what if an elderly person is lactose intolerant, which is a very common condition nowadays, or allergy to milk proteins? And it's not lactose intolerance, it's an allergy to some milk proteins. So which are present in whey protein, even in whey protein isolate. In whey protein isolate, you have proteins there, and it's protein from milk. You understand? So, and then what's the difference? You're comparing, for example, with hydrolyzed collagen, which is hypoallergenic, with a molecular weight of 1,600, which won't cause an allergic reaction in any way. So there, collagen wins in that sense. Then there's another thing that I say which is just an almost aesthetic issue, but for an elderly person, especially when we think about the elderly person's diet, they are very selective with their palate. So most whey protein flavors are vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, And there's dulce de leche, there's this, there's that. There are various types of flavors, but due to the digestibility itself, the palate itself, it's hard to have a whey protein, for example, with a citrus flavor. Very difficult. There are a few brands that have one or another citrus flavor, unlike collagen, which is easier to flavor. You have orange, lemon, pineapple, kiwi, tangerine, and others, because you can put any flavor. So this is an interesting aspect to be thought about too, right? And it's a very, very interesting aspect, right? And so making a comparison, we really have pros and cons, but many things that we would like to compare with whey protein, we still don't have that answer. I hope that by the middle of next year we finish this clinical study. It's a large study, and then we'll have this answer in a very clear way.
In clinical scientific terms, whey is already a more mature product in terms of studies, and collagen, we can say, is just starting out. It's been born, and the speed of discoveries is being very interesting, and this will help, right, the consumer in general to decide what they prefer, what's good, what's not. We're wrapping up here too, but in general terms, besides skin health and vitality, what is your recommendation beyond collagen in regards to supplementation and lifestyle? I know it's a very personal question, right? But from a scientific point of view, from what you've seen out there.
So from a lifestyle point of view, regular physical activity, and the ideal really is at least about 5 days of activity. The World Health Organization, the American College of Sports Medicine, states 150 minutes of physical activity weekly of moderate to high intensity. That is, if you divide by 5, it's 30 minutes per day, 5 days a week, and of moderate to high intensity activity. If it's light activity, you have to increase that amount. So physical activity is a must. And I joke that physical activity is twofold. You have to have aerobic exercise and you have to have strengthening exercise. So it's important to have both of these forms of physical activity. Next, sleep is something that people pay very little attention to. So we can think in terms of sleep hygiene. How many times we get home, take a quick shower, brush our teeth, poof, go to bed. Sometimes not even that. So the ideal is for us to have a preparation for sleep, to slow down our body so that when we lie down to sleep, we are really already more relaxed. And another thing about sleep, there is a disease, which is obstructive sleep apnea. When you hear the person, that's snoring. But after the snore, what's happening? It's the apnea. And this apnea, it can have two sources. It can have an etiology, a respiratory or central origin. So if you snore, you need to investigate, because the amount of oxygen, what's the problem with apnea? Sometimes the person has this apnea 200, 300, 400 times, even if briefly during a night's sleep of 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep. And each time you have apnea, the oxygenation of the blood drops. If the blood oxygenation drops, the recovery of your tissues, besides not happening, gets worse. And there are a number of factors involved in this. So quality of sleep, you have to, especially if the person snores, you have to investigate. Next, obesity, just being overweight, doesn't even need to be grade 1, 2, or 3 obesity. Just being overweight already gives you a greater tendency to have obstructive sleep apnea, so you have to investigate that too. Then logically, it's being careful with your diet. The idea is to no longer eat ultra-processed food, to reduce processed foods, and to go all out on natural foods. So this is very important. And then regarding supplementation, it varies a lot, because today there are supplements for everything. And if we take, for example, a list of supplements and look at the benefits of each one, we'll want to take everything. And there's a danger we're not supposed to take everything. So you need both a medical consultation, either with a nutrologist especially, or with a nutritionist, to be able to do an evaluation, and they can indicate what is best for each person, because it varies from time to time too. So for example, if we think, for example, in terms of antioxidants, vitamin A, C, D, and E are antioxidants. They are non-enzymatic antioxidants, right? But I can take, for example, ubiquinone. For example, I can take a flavonoid, trans resveratrol, for example, which is obtained there from grapes and is rich, including in wine. There are marvelous studies with trans resveratrol showing it as an antioxidant, protecting vessels throughout the body, including cardiac, cerebral vessels, and everything else. So what's the dose? It's something that has to be adjusted individually. It can't be, let's say, in a batch, in an unrestricted way. That's where the N of 1 concept comes in. It's very individualized. This has to be well studied, individualized, so that you have the maximum reduced risk, have the maximum success on this journey, because it is a journey. So I'll give an example, even in relation to supplementation with collagen itself or with whey protein. Why? Because in general, the world population eats a lot of fat and a lot of carbohydrates, sugar, and protein. The average is to eat around 40%, 35 to 40% of what they should eat in protein. And protein is what will give support to our immune system, what won't let the tissues of our body age or will decrease, slow down the aging of the tissues, the cells and tissues of our body, and it's what we eat the least of. And here I'm talking about both protein of plant origin and animal origin. So you imagine, and that's where the issue of collagen, whey protein, and other protein sources as supplements comes in. If we take a person weighing 50 kilograms, they should eat. But at the very minimum, if they don't have any restriction due to illness, something like that, 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of weight times 50 kilograms, 60 grams of protein per day. And then let's give a practical example. 60 grams of protein per kilo, 60 grams of protein per day, right? Let's suppose this person eats 4 meals a day, 60 divided by 4, 15 grams of protein per meal, sorry. And then look, how are they going to get 15 grams of protein? I'll speak in terms of animal protein to make some examples clearer. 1 liter of milk has 30 grams of protein. That is, if she's going to drink milk, 1 meal, 0.5 liters of milk, okay? Rodolfo, but that won't work. So she'll take, for example, 0.5 liters, 250 milliliters of milk. That will give 7.5 grams of protein, okay? She would have to supplement the other 7.5 grams. What could she do? It would have to be 1 whole egg, which would give around 6.5 grams to 8 grams, depending on the size of the egg. Easy, so far so good. Solve. 100 grams, for example, at lunch, she needs another 15 grams of protein, right? Then if you stop to think, let's think about putting this in meat. 100 grams of any lean meat, even without fat, right? Both a chicken breast fillet as an example, a very lean steak, whether pork or beef, it needs 100 grams will give around 18, depending on the meat, at most 20, 21 grams of protein. So that is, you need to eat another 100 grams of some meat at lunch. Then in the afternoon, she needs to repeat it, right? So what can she do there? Instead of eating, sometimes she's at work or something like that. What happens? That's the time to perhaps use the supplement. So I can take those 15 grams from collagen. Rodolfo, but I heard there's a 2.5 collagen. That recommends a dose of 2.5. Look, this 2.5 collagen, I can't say, but you can't take more than 2.5 grams of this collagen that says to take at most 2.5, because otherwise could have a very serious problem with your health. But if it's another collagen, and specifically PeptPure, you can use 15 grams of the collagen, which won't do any harm to your health. Quite the contrary. It will do a lot of good. You can use whey protein, meat protein, albumin, you can. But this specific collagen that says you're only supposed to take 2.5 grams per day, you can't take more. You can't take more because it will go badly, very badly for your health, right? So you took your whey, ate a fruit, something in the afternoon, lovely. Then you go to dinner, you're still at a deficit. Then you have to go to the 4th meal and eat another 15 grams of protein. So you say, Rodolfo, it didn't end up being too much for a 50 kilogram person. But if you put it for a 70 kilogram person, you're already talking about 84 grams of protein. Yes. For an 80 kilogram person, you're already talking about 96 grams of protein. You're almost doubling from 60 to 92 there, about 40% more. So where am I trying to get? And then you say, it seems easy, but see who really eats protein correctly. You understand? It's a very complicated situation, and we really have to be very careful with, I'm giving you this example, right? Because in a more practical way, because it's not that easy. And I'm talking, remember I said 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of weight, right? So some nutritionists recommend up to 2. That's exactly the point I was getting to. If you practice physical activity, you have to raise this ratio. It's at least 1.5 to 2, you understand? So those 60 grams of protein for that 50 kilogram person already goes up to 85 grams of protein. So what I gave the example of was the minimum. And then you can say, Rodolfo, but this calculation of the minimum of this, actually it was 0.8 to 1.2. Where did that come from? It was done in studies with soldiers in war in World War II.
This recommendation is in the World Health Organization website if our audience want to check.
So it came from war protocols. It was the minimum for the person to survive and manage to do the minimum they had to do. But what's worth pointing out, this minimum, it doesn't guarantee healthy aging, the best the person can have. It doesn't guarantee the best functioning of their body. So as I said in the example, when I started talking about the 50 kilograms, 1.2 grams, to make it easy, to make the math easy here, we're talking about the minimum. So, but you have to go up to 1.5, 1.8. Some nutritionists will come and recommend 2 grams per kilo of weight. So imagine if that 50 kilogram person, she's there, a woman, 1.65 meters with 50 kilograms. Oh, I'm too thin, I don't have muscle mass, etc., etc. She'll go up to 2 grams per kilo of weight. Times 50 kilograms, it already changed from 60, went up to 100 grams of protein. So imagine if she were to divide this 100 grams of protein by 4 meals, that's 25 grams. It would completely change the story, you understand? So what happens, for example, regarding collagen, which I mentioned, one of the advantages, even different from whey itself, is that its solubility, hydrolyzed collagen peptide, is much more soluble, much easier. And the versatility of application, right? Yes, you can put it in a shake, you can put it in juice wherever you want. You can put it in milk and juice wherever you want, in food. My wife uses it to put in cake. When she's going to make a cake, it makes a more protein-rich cake. I joke that then you eat it with less guilt. So, for example, there are even, for example, what do you call it? Those artificial powdered juices. There are 0 sugar packets, right? So you can put whatever flavor you want there, and there are various blend it with fruit pulp. You understand? Oh, I want to blend it with fruit pulp. So these are options that exist that facilitate the use of that hydrolyzed collagen peptide can help with. So I think this is very interesting. So we have to pay attention to this, and the issue of supplementation, it has to be individualized. It has to be individualized, and what do I always say? I don't have any symptoms of any disease, for example, but go to the doctor and get your checkup. In this checkup, ask them to measure vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin D3. In this case, the active form of vitamin D, the vitamins, vitamin B12, the basics, at least even if you don't have any symptoms, because sometimes the person won't even have symptoms, but they might have some deficiency that is a hypovitaminosis, a deficiency or a hypervitaminosis of some vitamin. So it's very important to do the exams to see what's happening and then be able to have an intervention, a more appropriate intervention. For example, in my case, I hardly get any sun. I supplement with 10,000 international units of vitamin D per day, of D3 per day, and my vitamin D stays there around 40, right? It doesn't even reach, I joke that it doesn't even reach the elixir of 60, you understand? So vitamin C itself, I also supplement with vitamin C, vitamin D3, vitamin A2. I use a certain dose of vitamin A every other day. So each person is different. You really need to evaluate in order for the doctor, the nutrologist, or the nutritionist to be able to make the prescription correctly.
Very good. Concluding then, the pillars: physical activity, sleep, nutrition, supplementation. And that's because we haven't even talked about mental healthy, spiritual side. So you really have to take care of yourself in a very holistic way because health demands 360 degrees care. It's not just one thing or another. And consistency is key, right? You really have to do it all every day, basically, not just once. It's not taking collagen once. It's not exercising once. It's not eating that amount of protein one day. It has to be a lifestyle to enjoy the long-term benefits. It's not an overnight miracle. It is indeed a commitment to yourself. Professor, thank you very much for this incredible conversation. Very enlightening as always. I'm sure that whoever is listening to us here has clarified, has gotten much more information about the role and the importance of collagen in personal health.
Thank you very much. I'm the one who thanks you. I'm always available, and let's continue together on this journey of discovering the effects of the hydrolyzed collagen peptides from PeptPure.
And for the listeners, remember that this is our first episode of Pep Talk, and we will work towards more content. Subscribe to get alerts when we release new episodes. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor.
Of course. Thank you.
Pep Talk.